She thinks your silence means you lost. But what if that silence is the exact moment you took your power back and she just hasn't realized it yet? At first, silence feels like defeat. It feels like you walked away without saying your last word, like you let her have the final laugh, like you surrendered the battlefield without even fighting. From the outside, it looks weak. It looks like you couldn't handle it, like you ran, like you had nothing left to say. And that's exactly why it works, because what most people don't understand is that silence is not giving up, silence is withdrawing energy. Silence is refusing to play a game that was never designed for you to win. When you stop responding, you stop feeding the dynamic, you stop providing emotional reactions, explanations, justifications, and validation. And that's the real currency in any emotional power struggle, not words, not arguments, emotional investment, presence. The moment you go silent, you take all of that back. You don't announce it, you don't make a speech. You just remove yourself from the exchange, and suddenly the entire structure collapses because it was built on your participation. She might laugh at first. She might think she won because you didn't fight back. But what she's really reacting to is the absence, the sudden drop in energy, the fact that something she used to control is no longer available. And that's uncomfortable because control only exists when there's something to control. When you disappear emotionally, there's nothing left to grab onto. Silence shifts the power dynamic because it removes predictability. Before, she knew how you'd react, she knew what buttons to press, she knew how to pull you back in, how to provoke you, how to get a response. But now there's nothing, no reaction, no explanation, no emotional feedback. And the human mind hates gaps, it hates unfinished stories, it hates not knowing. So, where you used to be present in reality, you now exist in her imagination. And imagination is always more powerful than reality. What looked like weakness becomes mystery. What looked like defeat becomes distance. And distance creates value, not because you're trying to manipulate anything, but because you're no longer accessible, you're no longer performing, you're no longer available for emotional extraction. You didn't argue, you didn't beg, you didn't explain, you simply stepped out of the role she had you playing. And that's the real shift. Silence is not about punishing her, it's about choosing yourself. It's about realizing that your energy is limited and not everyone deserves access to it. When you stop trying to be understood by someone who already decided not to understand you, you reclaim something deeper than control. You reclaim self respect. Because the truth is, the person who cares less always has more power, and silence is the fastest way to stop caring about outcomes you can't control. You're not silent because you're weak. You're silent because you're done explaining your worth to someone who benefited from you forgetting it. And that's when the power really shifts. At some point, silence stops being about her reaction and starts being about your transformation. Because the real shift doesn't happen in her mind first, it happens in yours. The moment you choose not to respond, not to chase, not to explain, you're breaking a habit. And most people don't realize this, but emotional attachment is just a pattern of repeated behaviors. You got used to checking your phone, you got used to waiting for replies, you got used to proving yourself, fixing things, holding the connection together. Silence interrupts that pattern. At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost painful. Your mind wants closure, it wants answers, it wants to say one more thing, send one more message, clear one more misunderstanding. But that urge isn't love, it's conditioning, it's your nervous system craving familiarity. And when you resist that urge, something powerful happens. You start to detach from the outcome. Detachment is not indifference, detachment is clarity. It's the ability to say, I can care, but I don't need. And that's a completely different energy. When you stop needing a response, you stop giving other people control over your emotional state. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer stuck in mental loops, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios, or trying to predict what she's thinking. This is where real confidence is built. Not in getting validation, but in being okay without it, not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself. Silence forces you to sit with yourself. It exposes the parts of you that were relying on her attention to feel valuable. And once you see that, you start rebuilding from the inside instead of outsourcing your self worth. And here's the paradox: the less you need her reaction, the more powerful your presence becomes, even in absence. Because now you're not acting from fear of loss, you're acting from self respect. You're not trying to control the narrative, you're letting go of it. And when you let go of the narrative, you step out of the emotional drama completely. Most people think power is about making someone feel something, making them miss you, regret you, chase you. But real power is not about influencing others. It's about mastering yourself. It's about not needing to prove anything. It's about being so grounded in who you are that other people's opinions, reactions, or silence no longer shake you. And that's what she really underestimated. She thought your silence meant you were hurt. She thought it meant you were lost. But what she didn't see was that your silence was doing something to you. It was making you stronger. calmer, more centered, less reactive, more selective. You weren't disappearing, you were upgrading, because when you stop chasing external validation, you start building internal stability. You start focusing on your goals, your growth, your discipline, your future. Your energy shifts from emotional survival to personal expansion. And once that happens, even if she comes back, she's not meeting the same version of you. She's meeting someone who no longer needs to be chosen. There's another layer to silence that most people never talk about, and it's the psychological one. Silence doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you're perceived. When you stop reacting, you stop being readable. And when someone can't read you anymore, they lose their sense of control over the situation. Not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you're no longer emotionally available in the way you used to be. Before, she knew your patterns. She knew when you'd reply, what you'd say, how you'd feel. She could predict your reactions, and predictability creates comfort. Even in conflict, even in tension, there's comfort in knowing you can still influence someone's emotions. But when you go silent, that predictability disappears, and the human mind is wired to seek certainty. So when certainty is gone, curiosity takes over. That's when she starts thinking about you differently. Not because you posted something, not because you sent a message, but because you didn't. Because there's a gap where you used to be, and that gap creates space for imagination, projection, and questions. What is he doing? Why isn't he reaching out? Did he move on? Does he even care anymore? And those questions hit harder than any argument ever could. Silence forces reflection. When you're constantly present, constantly explaining, constantly reacting, the other person never has to think deeply. They just respond to what's in front of them. But when you disappear emotionally, they're left alone with their own thoughts. And that's when memory starts replaying moments, conversations, feelings, things they took for granted, things they assumed would always be there. This is why silence often feels louder than words, because words can be dismissed, debated, but silence can't. It just exists. And in that existence, it invites interpretation, it invites meaning. And most of the time, people project their own fears into that space. They assume loss, they assume change, they assume they're no longer as important as they thought. But here's the key difference: you're not silent to create an effect in her. You're silent because you've stepped out of the emotional loop. The effect is just a side result. The real purpose of silence is self regulation. It's you choosing not to participate in cycles that drain you, confuse you, or keep you stuck in the past. And ironically, that's what makes silence so attractive. Because you're no longer seeking attention, you become more noticeable. Because you're no longer available, you become more valuable. Because you're no longer trying to be understood, you become more intriguing. Not through effort, but through absence. This is the shift from emotional expression to emotional mastery. You're not suppressing your feelings, you're simply not broadcasting them to someone who no longer has access to your inner world. You're keeping your energy contained, focused, directed toward your life, not the emotional chaos of a connection that already ran its course. So while she might laugh at your silence on the surface, internally something else is happening. The certainty she had about you is gone. The role she assigned to you is no longer being played. And that's unsettling, because the moment you stop being predictable, you stop being controllable. And that's when silence stops looking like weakness and starts feeling like presence. Eventually, silence creates something even deeper than mystery or curiosity. It creates contrast. And contrast what forces people to reevaluate value. When you were always available, always responsive, always emotionally present, your presence became normal. It became expected, not because you weren't valuable, but because consistency without out boundaries trains people to take things for granted. Human psychology works through contrast. We don't feel the value of air until we can't breathe. We don't feel the value of light until it's dark. And we don't feel the value of someone until their energy is no longer in the room. Silence removes the background noise of your presence and suddenly highlights the absence of it. This is where the internal shift begins for her. Not through logic, not through arguments, but through emotional comparison. She starts noticing the difference between how it felt when you were there and how it feels now. The conversations that are no longer happening, the attention that is no longer being given, the emotional safety that quietly disappeared. And that contrast creates a realization that words never could. Because value is not proven through explanation, it's revealed through absence. When you stop giving, the emotional ecosystem changes. The dynamic is no longer balanced the same way, and suddenly she feels a gap she didn't expect to feel. Not because she lost you physically, but because she lost access to your emotional energy. This is why chasing never works. Chasing removes contrast. It keeps you present in a way that feels available, predictable, and unlimited. There's no space for loss, no space for reflection, no space for missing. Silence, on the other hand, creates a vacuum, and the mind automatically tries to fill that vacuum with meaning. And here's the part most people misunderstand: This is not about teaching her a lesson. This is not about making her regret anything. This is about allowing reality to speak for you instead of your emotions. When you step back, the situation reveals itself naturally. If she valued you, she'll feel the absence. If she didn't, she won't. Either way, you get clarity without forcing anything. Silence protects your dignity. It allows you to leave without emotional damage, without humiliation, without losing yourself in explanations that won't be understood anyway. You're not trying to convince someone of your worth. You're letting them experience the consequences of your absence. And this is where self respect becomes visible, not through what you say, but through what you tolerate. When you stop tolerating emotional imbalance, so you stop investing where you're not valued, and that sends a message stronger than any text ever could. The irony is, she might only realize your value when she no longer has access to it, but by then, something in you has already changed. You're no longer waiting to be appreciated. You're no longer depending on someone else's awareness to validate your presence. Because once you understand your own value, you don't argue for it. You withdraw from places where it's not recognized, and silence becomes the line between who you used to be and who you've decided to become. And that's when absence becomes your strongest statement. There comes a moment in silence where it stops being a reaction and becomes a standard. At first, you went quiet because you were hurt, confused, or tired of explaining yourself. But over time, that silence evolves into something intentional. It becomes a boundary, not one you announce, not one you defend, but one you live by. You start to realize that not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your emotions, your time, or your energy. This is where your mindset changes completely. You're no longer thinking in terms of how do I make her see my value? You're thinking in terms of who actually earns my presence. And that shift is subtle, but it's powerful because now you're not trying to be chosen, you're choosing. You're not trying to fix dynamics, you're evaluating them. Silence teaches you emotional discipline. It teaches you that you don't have to respond to every trigger, you don't have to explain every feeling, you don't have to react to every provocation. You begin to understand that peace is more important than being right, and self respect is more important than being understood by someone who isn't listening anyway. And once you develop that discipline, your entire emotional identity shifts. You become calmer in situations that used to shake you. You become less reactive to things that used to control you. You stop needing closure from people who couldn't give you clarity even when they were present. This is the moment you stop romanticizing potential and start respecting reality. You stop chasing what could have been and start investing in what actually is. And that's when silence turns into self leadership. You're no longer waiting for someone else to change so you can feel better. You're changing so your environment has to adjust. And here's what most people never realize: boundaries don't push people away, they filter them. They reveal who respects you and who only liked you when you were accessible, accommodating, and emotionally available on demand. Silence exposes intentions. Some people disappear, others step forward. Either way, you win because you're no longer guessing. This is also where attraction shifts, not in the sense of trying to be desirable, but in the sense of becoming grounded. When you're no longer chasing emotional validation, you naturally project stability, and stability is rare. It's attractive because it's not seeking approval. It's not loud. It's not desperate. It's quiet confidence. She might still laugh at your silence on the surface, but deep down, what she's really feeling is distance, not emotional distance, but psychological distance. You're no longer where she left you. You're not in the same role. You're not operating on the same rules. And that's unsettling because she can't access the version of you that was always available. You didn't become cold. You became selective. You didn't become distant. You became intentional. And that's the difference between shutting down and leveling up, because silence isn't about disappearing from her life. It's about finally showing up in your own. The final transformation that silence brings is identity, not the identity she sees, but the one you build when no one is watching. Because when you remove external validation, attention, and emotional feedback, you're left with yourself, your thoughts, your goals, your habits, your direction. And for the first time, your sense of self is no longer shaped by how someone responds to you. This is where real growth happens, not in getting her back, not improving anything, but in realizing that your life is bigger than one connection, one person, one chapter. Silence creates space, and in that space, you start rebuilding, you refine your routines, you invest in your health, you sharpen your focus, you redirect your energy from emotional survival to personal creation. And this is the part nobody talks about. Silence doesn't just detach you from her, it reconnects you with your future. It forces you to ask questions you were avoiding before. What do I want? Where am I going? Who am I becoming? Because when you're emotionally entangled, your identity shrinks around the relationship. But when you step back, Your world expands again. This is also where your standards rise. You stop tolerating mixed signals. You stop accepting half effort. You stop chasing people who are unsure about you, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You finally understand that attraction without respect is a dead end, and connection without consistency is emotional noise. And ironically, this is when the dynamic fully flips. Because now, even if she reaches out, the power is no longer in the interaction. The power is in your choice. You're no longer waiting to be picked. You're evaluating alignment. You're not asking, does she want me? You're asking, does this add to my life? That's the ultimate shift. From emotional dependence to emotional leadership, from reaction to intention, from seeking to selecting, silence matures you. It strips away the need to perform, impress, or prove. It reveals who you are without an audience. And once you experience that version of yourself, you don't want to go back to being emotionally accessible to anyone who hasn't earned it. So even if she once laughed at your silence, even if she thought she won, the truth is the game ended the moment you stopped playing, because you didn't lose her, you found yourself, and that's the only win that actually lasts.